an organization is almost always a reflection of the leadership. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot. And today we have a story where politics and business collide, as is not infrequent, but this one we took kind of personally.
Yeah.
And
them's fighting words.
So we're going to talk about Baltimore, and we're going to talk about leadership, and we're going to talk about the lack thereof.
Yeah, for sure. And before we jump into that story, just a quick reminder, if you like this podcast, if you like the conversations we have here, if you listen, please share with your friends. That is how we grow. That's how we take over the world, like Pinky and the Brain.
It's the domination.
No, that is the way this we can do all the advertising in the world, but the way this podcast grows, we know this to be true, is when you share it with friends, when you tell them about it, when you post on social media. So please do so.
Please do.
Off we go.
Okay.
So here's my story. As you know, Elliot, as most of Baltimore certainly knows, and probably everyone listening, there's been a lot of hubbub about Baltimore in the past week or so in the news.
Which we take personally because Baltimore is the headquarters of SHMS Global.
Yes, SHMS Global is headquartered right here in Baltimore. And there's no way anyone has missed the things that have been flying around on Twitter. But, President Trump said some really nasty, pretty vile things about Baltimore, lashing out at Elijah Cummings. And so that is not specifically what I want to do the episode on, but it did spark this thought that had me post a thing on Facebook about that is absolutely very, very, very leadership focused. And that is this fascination I have. So essentially, let's pretend he's not the president of the country. Let's say he's the CEO of an organization, and there's a guy who works for him or a woman who works for him, and he's displeased with what that person is doing, or how something is going on there. You can't throw shade or disconnect yourself from the things that are in your charge. Like when you're a leader, you wholesale relinquish your right to consider yourself separate from anything in your organization. If some part of it is bad or wrong or struggling, then you are bad or wrong or struggling. And as I said in this post that I wrote, it's not your job to actually fix it per se. It's not like the leader is supposed to go in and do all the fixing, but you don't get to denigrate it and pretend that you are somehow better than it or separate from it. It's one big thing. And so I was writing this and I was thinking of all these examples of where I've seen this happen in small ways and big ways in organizations. And so I just wanted to sort of toss that out for you and see, is that something, do you see that happen? And what are the dangers of it? What are the solutions for it? Why is it, if you agree with me, why is it important that leaders not imagine they have that luxury to look at a thing in their organization and be like, oh, that's bad or wrong?
Well, first of all, I will say I was born and raised in Baltimore. I love the city, and I was personally really taken aback by it. And I do agree that you don't get a chance to reverse the buck stops here and saying, well, I'm only going to be president. I'm only going to be the leader of some of the things that I like, but the other things that I don't like, that's not in any way my responsibility. It's not part of what I'm leading. And I've seen this. I had a long time ago, I was working with a software company that really prided itself on being incredibly innovative and cutting edge. And those were the products they were putting forward. That was the target market for them, were these innovators. But they had really what was a cash cow of a whole department doing legacy code for companies, large national companies that used old code. They just didn't want to switch. And that was just a department that was doing really well. Well, the CEO would routinely in meetings throw shade on the legacy people and would talk about how, Jim's over there because, he's obviously not good enough to be in the Java group. And sometimes he would say that and people would kind of chuckle, but the whole legacy group, because I knew the group, would view themselves as the person locked in the attic that you don't want to talk about, this relative that you don't want to claim as part of the family. Yeah, they're there, but you'd rather, they have to go up in the attic when company comes because you want to show everything that you have. And so it kind of reminded me of that, but I thought it was more heartless than that to say that you're not good enough to be one of us. You're something to be made fun of or something to be insulted, and I lead something better over here.
Well, especially because it actually stooped to literally say, like, why would any human want to live there? Yeah. Which essentially just says, we might as well just burn it down, right. Just like get rid of it. And here's the thing, like, because I want to be super clear. It's not like you're not allowed to have judgments as a leader. In fact, it is your job to identify what's not working, where there are problems, where there are issues to solve. But if you see a thing that isn't working the way it should, that isn't getting the outcomes, let's say the person the manager above that thing is doing a terrible job, which for the record, I don't think Elijah Cummings is doing a terrible job, but let's pretend for a second that he's like the worst representative ever.
Which I think is what Trump said. But
it's what he's trying to say. Yeah. Well, and people can debate that, but let's say he's right and that it's true. Then all the more reason that you have to have an eye on the thing that you have to be looking out for the best interests of the thing that person is running in your company. You don't get to separate yourself from it. And like, if there is something that's not working, whether it's a person or a division or a whole line of product or something, you don't have the luxury to just kick it in the shins and make fun of it, because you're literally cannibalizing a part of the thing that it's your job to raise up. You have to facilitate the solution of making that thing better. You have to be part. It's so cliche, but you have to be part of the solution to lead a thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. And you really, what you set up is a dynamic of which this podcast is a part for this episode, where people are defending themselves against the leader. Mm-hmm. And so it goes back to Lincoln's, a house divided cannot stand. So you set up that dynamic where I'm going to cast myself in a position against something that is a part of me.
Exactly. I mean, it's almost like me being like, that is the worst right hand ever. And let's burn that thing. Well, I just burned off my right hand. Now I don't, it's a terrible metaphor, but you get the point. Like it is one organism, and you can't, it has to operate like one organism. But you bring up a really important point, which is the energy drain of it all. When the other way I see this show up is any kind of like siloing whenever there's a particular kind of language that I listen for when I'm working with organizations, where a lot of times when conversations are happening where people are using proper nouns, well, marketing does this, and the implementation team is like where groups become these proper nouns that are having conflict. To me, that is often, not always, but often a sign of this kind of us against them, where there is a lack of a shared. I was actually just having a conversation yesterday where one of my clients had a team that was already her team. And then they've taken this other team that used to be part of a different division and have moved them in with her, because it makes more sense for those two things to be together than the two things that were together before. And she was asking, she wanted my input on how to, is there an activity that you can do to make them more unified and not think, because they often, interestingly, and this happens a lot, they have some conflicting priorities. Like her existing team wants, let's just say likes to go fast, and this team needs to go slow so they get it right or something. That's not really the case, but so they need, and I said to her, what they really need is tools and strategies to navigate those conflicting priorities in a way, but they'll never get there. And there's no like team building activity you can do if at the end of the day, they don't imagine that they have the same goal.
Yeah.
Like if the entire pod, whether it's a team or division or a state or a country, isn't trying to aim for the same outcome, the same shared destination, or just imagine that they're all in the same boat, then it's going to be really hard to get those people Like they have to be focused on some shared value or.
A long time ago, this is not original with me. I was told it and I wish I could remember who told me, but it was a story. It was the Zen of the hand and the chair. So, yeah. So if you imagine that somebody came along and they said they had the intention and the capability, and they announced their intention to cut off your little finger. Well, what would naturally happen is that the rest of your hand would curl up into a fist to defend that little finger, to defend against that component. Now, take the chair, though. If you have the chair that is immobile and rigid and fixed in its structure, somebody chops off a leg of the chair. And if you imagine the other components of the chair, the back is backs, the seat keeps your bottom from hitting the ground, all the legs support the structure. One of those legs is chopped off. All of the other components of the chair would notice that it's starting to tip. And they'd be like, well, here we go. We're going. We're going to hit the floor. We're going to hit the floor. But none of them move, of course.
Right.
And so you hit the floor.
Yeah.
And so what this person had said is, each organization has to choose. Are they the hand or the chair? And here's one of the ways that you can tell. If you walk into an organization, particularly one that's failing, you could ask anybody from the receptionist to the guys in marketing, whatever, and they'll all tell you the solution. Oh, the guys in inventory don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Oh, geez, sales, if you had asked me, we're selling the wrong product at the wrong price to the wrong people.
I love that you're using that voice from like the film noir kind of, hey, Sam, how you doing?
Sam, that Hitler, he's a bad egg. Yeah, so anyway, so 1920s. But yeah, so everybody seems to have the solution to what the other department is doing wrong. They're not going to actually be part of the problem, but they are going to point out the mistakes because they're the chair. They're not going to move. Yeah. They're going to notice the whole thing is falling over.
Here we
and
go.
They're just going to give commentary on it, as opposed to the hand where you see one part is threatened and everybody comes together in common purpose to combat that threat.
That is a fantastic comparative metaphor. And that's exactly what it feels like. It's way better than my hand metaphor where I'm burning it off. But
yes, don't do that.
Because when I read that post about what Trump had said, that's what it felt like. It felt like he looks at our country as if we're a chair, like he views it as a chair and you could just lob off that leg and no one would care. Like, why would anybody live there? Let's get rid of that. As opposed to the kind of leadership that does incite an organization and a culture in a company or in a country that works more like a hand, where if we have a problem, we all have a problem.
Yeah, and so the question that you had asked at the beginning is, what would be the preferable technique? Because here's the thing, and it's something that is a truth that is hard to admit. If you try to extract the racist overtones and the all of the overtones that we're talking about,
that's a lot of overtones.
That's a lot of overtones, and that's a lot of substance. But if you imagine a leader constructively looking at the problems. Are there problems in the cities? Not just restricted to Baltimore, of course, but are there problems in the cities? Sure.
Absolutely.
In terms of governance, in terms of quality of life of residents of certain neighborhoods, and, all of these things.
There are absolutely parts of Baltimore, especially in that district, that are blighted and have massive issues and problems that need to be addressed, for sure.
Right. Although if you look at the map, it's a gerrymandered district.
Oh my God, it's so gerrymandered, which is a problem in and of itself. Like, address that problem.
Yeah. So you do have legitimate problems to address, but the point is that you have to address them and not just label them as the other, as somebody else's problem.
That's the funny thing. It's like when you are the CEO of a thing, when you are the president of a thing, when you are the leader of anything, when you just sort of stand on your high horse and poke fun at things, like, they're your things.
Yeah. And so I do see people, and I've seen this fairly regularly, the management teams or whatever going, oh yeah, they're just, pick a name, oh, well, that's just the X department. Yeah. they don't know what they're doing or whatever. And it's not uncommon that I'll hear that. Oh, so wait a minute, are they part of you? Yeah, but they're just over in their own little world, or they're doing whatever, and I just don't have time. Because you like to focus on the things that are new and exciting and killing it out there and getting the kind of clients or customers you want, and you want to focus on them, and they're dynamic. And so there is a tendency to say, yeah, and those people, they just do what they do. I haven't gotten around to dealing with them yet. But,
right. Well, I had an experience probably about 6 or 8 months ago where I accompanied a client to a meeting, and to make a very long story short, is very complicated how I ended up being there. But I found myself sitting in on a leadership team meeting of a pretty good sized company, about 40 million a year sized company. And there were many conversations going on. The one that I was there for was kind of coming up on the agenda, but they were having these other conversations first. And it was such a weird experience for me because I was there in such a capacity that it was really not my place to weigh in on this part of the conversation, which was really hard for me because it was really hard because this is the, so I doodled a lot. No, in those moments, like you can tell by when you look at my notes about how much I was having to sort of like channel my thoughts and not say the things that were in my head, because there'll be increasing doodles on my page where I'm like, focus, don't say the things. But here I am sitting in this leadership team meeting, and they are talking about this next level down of leaders. We'll just call it like tier 2 leaders. And at that level, there were absolutely, and I would agree with this part, some very poor leadership going on. Like they weren't managing and leading well. They were abdicating. They were coming into these management meetings and that they were having and just sort of complaining and not coming up with solutions. Just fundamentally, there was this lack of understanding that like if you are a manager or a leader and you see a problem, you have to help solve that problem. But then hysterically, here are the people who those people are direct reports to, sitting here talking about how those people are not doing what they should be doing or leading the way they're supposed to be doing, as if they're like some other company or something.
Right, you're just observing them.
And they're like, and they were so legitimately frustrated. They're like, well, I don't know what, these guys, they just won't do what they're, and I was like, I wanted to be like, who do you imagine is in charge of them? Like, you are their people. And more hysterically, they were doing exactly what they were complaining that this group of people was doing, which was getting together in a room and complaining about the people complaining about things and not actually offering a solution. And it was just like the hypocrisy of it. And that's not even quite the right word, but just the inaneness of it was just screaming in my ear, because I was like, wait a minute, first of all, you're clearly not modeling how to lead that way. So they're not going to lead that way. And forget that for a second. You're just letting them lead that way. And anyway, well,
it goes back, and we've mentioned this before. One of the most interesting statements that somebody had said to me about business a long time ago was, you teach what you tolerate.
Absolutely.
And in fact, you could even go further than that. You can say you stand for what you tolerate in many ways. And it's interesting to me when you mention the tier 2 leadership, because when I do mergers and acquisitions, when I have a company that is actively looking to buy another company, one of the first things that my client who's acquiring will look for is really solid tier 2 leadership, because the tier 1 leadership is expected to ride off into the sunset after the closing.
Right, exactly.
So
yeah,
my guys want to see that there's going to be some continuity there, that the things that made the target attractive in the first place are going to continue in some way, shape, or form. And if tier 2 leadership is unprepared to take over any management role of consequence, then the acquirer will look elsewhere.
Well, and this is why I wanted to do this as a topic, not just because that whole conversation happening that our president started got my hackles up, but because I really think this is an important thing. I would take the statement you just made, you teach what you tolerate, what was the second one you said? What you stand for. I actually would take it even a step forward. I see this so often that whatever, like an organization is almost always a reflection of the leadership. Like whatever that person, whatever your best traits are, whatever your worst traits are, it shows up in the organization. And that sounds kind of woo-woo, but it is just an expanded, scaled version of you teach what you tolerate. And so I was sitting there, and this conversation that I was having to witness from afar and not say anything, they were talking all about they were frustrated with trickled down through the organization was this lack of accountability or lack of any kind of consequences for things that happen. And yet, when there was some talk about, well, if these tier 2 folks aren't doing XYZ like they're supposed to, what happens? And the answer was like, well, we don't want to risk losing them, so we don't crack that whip or whatever. And I was like, so you're not willing to create a sense of that there are consequences to actions, or that you're not willing to hold a high bar for what it is expected to be a leader in this company. So why on earth would you imagine that anywhere in this company that would show up? Because every single day you prove that that is not something you value. You prove that that is not something you make decisions by. So, and ultimately people are looking up through an organization for clues as to what matters and what doesn't matter. So whatever you stand there and be is is the message that you are saying to your organization is what's okay.
Right. And every once in a while, you might have that one special person or 2 special people that are willing to go through the headwinds, of your toleration of incompetence or apathy or whatever.
Of bad
and you
or
have
good.
people who are going to say, yeah, I know that it's okay not to care, but I still do. Mm-hmm. But then you're navigating, you're always sailing into headwinds.
Always. And yeah, it's not like they can't show up, but the systemic problems that you have as an organization, if you don't pause, and I mean, that's why this topic is so important. It is that when you lead a thing, you have to recognize that you are the goose at the front of the thing. Like, you direct what happens, you direct what matters, you direct how problems start and stop, and you can't separate yourself from those things because they literally follow you around like a centipede or something. And so I'm really off on my metaphors today.
You're off on your metaphors.
Really off on them.
But I do like the centipede and the burned right hand.
And the birds and the burned right hand. It's just going downhill quickly.
But the point is that the comments that President Trump made were an abdication of leadership. It wasn't an exercise of leadership in pointing out how somebody else is failing. If that somebody else or something else is within your organization, then pointing it out without any solution, but just to denigrate it, is the opposite of leadership. It's the abdication of it. And that, I think, is what offended me so deeply.
We're having this entire conversation as if we're trying to pretend like that statement was made because he has genuine concerns about how that district of Baltimore is doing, which skips over the entire part. It was basically a middle school jab, like something you'd write on a bathroom wall or something, just trying to make fun of someone. So we're actually giving this conversation far more credit than is due. But I did like that it surfaced this thing that I think actually is very substantive in many, many organizations I see all the time. So
yeah, and one of the things that you had said at the beginning, probably before we even hit record, was #We Are Baltimore. And I feel that very strongly as part of an organization or as part of a country. I think it's We Are Baltimore. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.